Alrighty, here we begin. So it's a delight today to have this conversation with Carmelo Presice, a wonderful human being I've got to know of the last 1 year. And formerly, Carmelo is a grad student at the MIT Media Labs, and he works at the, could you name your lab?
Lifelong kindergarten.
Lifelong LLK, of course. Lifelong kindergarten, a wonderful lab set up by Mitch Resnick, who's been at this for like quite a while now. So he's got an interesting background, and he has spent a bunch of years in the industry. And more importantly, and more relevant to this conversation, is he's been instrumental in setting up a bunch of wonderful communities, and that's his strength. And we'd love to hear his thoughts on what he's understood of this whole activity of building communities from the ground up. The motivation, of course, for having this conversation is also slightly personal. So I come in from this perspective of wanting to understand how these communities thrive and work, and that's largely because of the kinds of attempts that I'm trying to do back home in India, in Bangalore, where the larger objective over there for me personally is to get into the local administration, politics and governance over there. And one key ingredient which I perceive, which I believe will be essential after having gotten into office, is the existence of communities in that ecosystem who are extremely civic conscious, who are very aware of the civic responsibility side of things, and meanwhile also bring in certain kinds of skills to the table. So let's say we want like a team of I would ideally want everyone who has some interest. Of course, everyone has a bone in the game because this is their local community, and this is what local administration is all about, getting together people from a community to empower that system. But what is also important is the fact that people with different skills, specific skills, come together and see themselves as belonging to this ecosystem and being able to contribute their skills as well to the larger enterprise of administration and governance. So that's the larger motivation. And the specific work that I've been after is trying to get together a community of data scientists to be able to look at local city level data and be able to just understand the city from the lens of this data perspective, and also try to in that process get to know who the people are who are interested in this enterprise, and as a consequence build a community out of that, people with those kinds of skills. So that's the personal sort of take on all of this. But I think the kinds of conversations I've had with Carmelo over the last couple of weeks also sort of leads to, it also stems from a general academic interest that I have in this, in the sense that it's a very curious topic, it's a very fascinating topic. I've had my brush with trying to form small communities, for example, in my dorm, and some things have been a disaster, and these are very interesting conversations I generally have with Carmelo on like what could be going wrong and what could be going right. And I think this conversation is to tease apart those different ingredients, which in our collective experience we have come across as recognizing to be essential to building such communities. So having laid out this elaborate motivation and background, I think we should probably start off with Carmelo, you spending some time in talking to us about the kinds of communities you worked with, and the just give us a background for the kind of community work that has happened and that you've led.
Okay, first of all, thanks for inviting me to the first ever, I guess, episode of this podcast that you're running. And as you were mentioning, we've been talking about these topics at length by sharing the space in which we live in the last few weeks.
Yep.
And I'm very happy to engage in this conversation about communities because it's something that it's really dear to me. It's a topic that is not only academically but mostly personally important for me. And yes, I think I don't know how we'll be able to tease apart the different components that make us a community, a successful community, a community in which we want to be and and other people want to be. But I'm very happy to share some of my experience and also like discussing this kind of like a back and forth as we've been doing very naturally in the past few days where we weren't recording. So
absolutely.
I hope this can be an opportunity for us to get more insights and maybe for someone who's listening, like to get some ideas and probably maybe contributing to this discussion.
Absolutely. And for those of you unfortunately who can't see us in the current setting that we're in, we're in like a really cozy setting where we have two couches pointed towards like a artificial fireplace. It's snowy outside, it's warm inside. We've got like a cup of tea in our hands and a basket of fruits around us. So this is like a really cozy conversation, and I think we would have done it irrespective of whether this was being recorded or not. So it's unfortunate that you can't indulge in the ambience that we're currently involved in. But I just want to set the visual scene for you folks listening in.
I'm pretty sure this atmosphere will influence the vibes.
Absolutely. Hell yeah.
Cool. So now back to your questions, communities and like my experience with communities. I might say maybe I'll try to make it a very short, kind of long story short. My background is similar to yours in computer science and software engineering, but about like 7 or 8 years ago, I started to work as a volunteer and I founded a coding club for children, just out of passion, just out of like curiosity, just out of fun, and building that kind of like setting up that coding club is called the Coder Dojo coding club. Really, for the first time probably in my life, put me in a condition in which I needed help to do it, and I needed like people to help me, and I think that was my first experiment with community, which was in Bologna in Italy at a very local level, and we had a very specific task to do, and I can talk more about like what that experience was for me and still is for me. And then again, fast forward, like after a couple of years like working in Coder Dojo in this kind of like local setting, but also helping a broader national and international communities of similar clubs, which we can also talk about, like what is the national dimension of like networked coding clubs, and that was a space in which we were mostly interacting online and then just like meeting up sometimes, in different ways. Fast forward to 2007, actually 2015 is when I joined the Lifelong Kindergarten group here. In 2007 is when 17 is when I started working on a global community of educators, so it's putting together people who kind of like are interested in learning about creative learning, which is the main framework and the way in which we talk about education and learning. And that also has been an adventure that's continuing, and it's been like a sort of like iterating on this kind of like community design, community facilitating, community building, and again there's just so many layers, so many kind of like aspects of it that I'd be happy to talk more about.
Nice. And just as a point of clarification, the Coder Dojo stuff that you started was more of it wasn't a full-time thing that you were doing.
No, I was doing Coder Dojo as a very kind of an extra thing. I was at the time I was working mostly as a software developer, like as a freelance. So I had flexibility of time, which was very important for me. Like I couldn't have done it without kind of like the space and the possibility of doing it. And also we used to meet on Saturday afternoons, like inviting the kids to a library or any place that we were hosted in. And so that also helped volunteers to kind of like show up on a Sunday afternoon. And of course, like our interactions were, you know, like even the key moment was like this the actual workshop happening with the kids. Also, you know, we had like meetings maybe a couple of days before to set up, or you know, just like and then we became friends. That's the thing. And so like even in after the first few events, we started to see each other just for fun.
Nice. And the community that you're building currently, which is, could you remind me the name again?
We call it like LCL,
LCL,
which is Learning Creative Learning. And it's centered around an online course,
right?
Where we call it online course and community, very intentionally, because.
But this is something that you started from scratch after you got into the lab in your graduate program, or was this something that already existed and you took over, or what is your sort of how did you get into this?
So that's actually a very interesting question, because Learning Creative Learning was a project that Mitch Resnick, Natalie Rusk, Phyllis Smith, and few others had started in the lab in 2012, 2013.
I see.
And I was participating.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I was a participant in the second edition of Learning Creative Learning, joining from Italy. That was actually the time in which I already had started working as an educator, just like working in this free coding club for children. And that gave me a framework of the ideas of like why we were doing that and how we could do it in a certain spirit. And even more interesting, that was for me a place in which I met like-minded people who are still my friends, and they introduced me to others. Like I met Beatrice, who was like we were 3 people from Italy. Beatrice was one of them. She said, you should talk with this other person who's also from Italy. And we started like talking outside of the context of LCL, outside of the channels. And our friendship still continues, that we made projects together. And that is, to me already, as we're talking about community, is a very good sign, right? Like that kind of like we met there. But anyway, this is to say that there was already some work and like the kernel of a certain community. But then what happens is that as many research projects, you know, you do the thing, you write something about it, and there's other priorities and other things you want to do. And so LCL was kind of like frozen as a project.
I see.
Actually, again, if I don't want to like talk too much about this, but I think it's also interesting that one of the attempts of the people who've been working on this in 2013 was they wanted to make it sustainable, of course. Like nobody likes to shut down a course and a community. But of course there was no resources to do it. So what they thought was, let's make it automatic. That's actually something that, you know, it's very common in a place as MIT. Okay, let's try to automatize this. And so basically there were like some emails that were just like prepared, and it would go to people, helping them, you know, pace actually I think the deal was you subscribe, like you leave your email. When we reach 1,000 emails, a new cohort starts. And then there is a system that sends you email every week, so you go through the 6 weeks of the course.
Wow. So it was all through email. The majority correspondence from LCL side was through email.
There is a forum, right? Which is the core part. What was especially at that time the core place where people met. But the email is just like, you know, like a clock, like it sends you, you know, okay, we're entering week 2. These are the activities of week 2. Go in the forum and share your thoughts or pictures of things that you've been doing and engage in conversation, which is also very important, because it's not a course in which you just like watch a video lesson, take a test individual. It was always like since the beginning very built with a very vivid idea of community building, of like people getting together. Peers is one of the pillars of our approach. So we wanted to. But interestingly enough, this automated email kind of like type of engagement didn't really work.
Interesting.
And it's hard to say why, but like my intuition, I suspect, is that there was perceived as not really human, right?
Okay.
You know it's an automatic email. You know that someone is not writing it. There's no presence of like connection with some facilitators who can help people getting to know each other and everything. So I felt there was like not enough support. It was a good idea, not enough support, not enough human support, and I would say not enough human warmth. I don't know how to say.
Sure.
And so anyway, this is to say that the project was suspended, and then in 2017 I started working on it just because I thought it was so helpful for me. There was another kind of like it was a postdoc, Yumiko Murai, who wanted to run an edition in Japanese because she said, okay, I want to share these ideas with my community in Japan, and I jumped in and said, hey, if you do it, I want to also do it in Italian because I want to share these ideas with the Italian community. And so that is not only translating materials, but it's also just kind of like facilitating conversations and having being there for these people. And then we started thinking, okay, but should we do these separate editions, or do we want to do a global community with sub-chapters and everything? That's the road that we decided to do. And so now it's been like, we call it rounds. So we since 2017 there have been 6 rounds, and people come back. It's not that I've learned creative learning and I'm done. No, we designed the entire experience in a way that people can come back, learn by engaging again with the ideas, because people are different, and so you discuss.
You get something out new every time.
Yeah, and you start to learn other people better.
Sure.
Like one thing is like you engage or you meet someone one time or 2 times in the course of 6 weeks, and then never again. And one thing is like you come back every semester or every year, and you find people you've been interacting with, you find people you know where they live, in which country, you have exchanged something very personal, because we also try to make it very personal. And so that's how kind of the LCL community has been growing in this last few years. Plus, in last year, we started to engage some of the participants as facilitators, and that's been a huge breakthrough.
Interesting.
Because participants in LCL, usually we have between 5 and 10,000 people signing up.
Wow. Wow. Okay, that's the scale we're talking about. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
But it's very hard to engage with the community that big at a personal level, right?
Yeah.
So instead, we started to engage with some of the participants who were particularly active, particularly aligned, particularly helpful and generous with others.
Yeah.
And we said, why don't you just join us in this facilitation team? And so with them, we also have extra meetings, and we've been really connecting. And now this year was we were about say 30 to 40 people working as facilitators, volunteers. And again, we can talk more about this. But there's a core of people who've been super active and very, very pretty much at the center of the community. Some people who are been participating as they could, when they could, and some people who weren't able to participate as much as they wanted, but they're still in our channels, and they interact in the way they can. So again, but it's maybe just to bring it back, as I'm talking about facilitators, I started to see a pattern. I started to see that the work that I was doing globally online with this people from all over the world who were engaged in being facilitators for the LCL participants had a lot in common with a hyper-local city-based group of mentors, we call them. They were facilitators for the coding club for children, right? So there was I started to see some patterns there, and even though these communities are different from along many different dimensions, there is something in common there and something that I enjoy being part of.
Nice. So for those probably who don't have a background or don't have a context to what really are communities and when would I call myself as being a part of community. So for instance, I could be a part of a community and not even realize that it is a community. Would I term it as a community? So I noticed that when you initially, this was I think 10 minutes ago in the conversation, when you started talking about it, you used a couple of phrases like forming, building, facilitating. So you threw in all these words which seem to be verbs to describe the process required to sort of create these communities.
Mm-hmm.
And you also started off with the notion of I began this community simply because I was super passionate about it and I loved what I was doing. So this, I think also, and you started talking about facilitators. So if you can give me a breakdown of your notion of, let's say, okay, so and to also put all this in context, I think the kinds of communities that you have implicitly referred to over here are probably learning communities,
Mm-hmm.
communities where the beneficiary, so everyone is a beneficiary, but let's say there is a target audience in mind who are coming over there, who are participating so that they can learn something tangible out of this experience.
Yes.
That's a learning community?
It's part of being in a learning community.
It's part of being.
I think this is a dual role, especially in which facilitators and volunteers are, because from one side they are helping others learn, right? And this makes them part of a learning community in terms of they're helping others learn,
right?
But at the same time, by engaging in this process, they are learning themselves in first person, right?
Sure.
So there's always this duality of someone as a learner and as a facilitator, which is crucial, and it's one of the aspects that I see in common with my main experiences, right? But also you're asking about, the verbs that I use, and actually the verb that I prefer to use in this case is cultivating communities. I see that the metaphor of putting the seed of putting a seed of an idea of community in a certain terrain, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't work, but for sure it grows at a certain natural speed. You cannot really push it faster than that, and requires to be nurtured and attended, right? And loved, and so I think of all the terms that I've been using, I think cultivating is the one that kind of gets a little closer to what I mean.
Sure.
And again, you're also asking about different types of communities,
right.
And then it's a very fuzzy. The word community is very very fuzzy, but my direct experience as a community cultivator has been mostly in the realm of learning communities of facilitators, of people who want to help other people learn specific things.
Right. And one thing that seems to be common amongst all of what you've said is the fact that you value the personal component much more than probably the rest of the ingredients in it, in the sense that you would rather get to know each of these people at a personal basis and have this shared sense of belonging over some concrete objectives like, okay, has someone learned X or has someone learned Y? Would you place that, would you provide more emphasis on just getting to know these people as humans first, and then probably thinking about whether the initial aim of probably imparting, let's say, Python knowledge or some such specific programming knowledge in the case of your Coder Dojo, or any other concrete skill that comes secondary. So is that like a fair way
There
to...
is a lot to unpack in that question. I think it's a very good one because
just before you continue, I mean, the reason why I bring this up is here's a counterexample. So a counterexample for a community could probably just be a Facebook group where people are selling used stuff. So let's say I have some thing that I want to give away. I join this Facebook group. I find a lot of people. I chat probably casually with a couple of them, but there's this clear objective where I want to actually find people who are interested in buying stuff that I have. Would I call this a community? Because I'm always a part of this group. I'm checking it fairly often for messages. I probably say hi, hello to some people once in a while, but that's not really a necessity. But somehow we would all agree. I mean, if I give this example to anyone, they would probably say that, yeah, I don't think this is a community. I don't think I would call this a community. This is a transactional group, which is like just making a certain task convenient by just coming together and having a shared platform. But I wouldn't call that a community. I wouldn't go to the extent of framing it as a community. So there is a human component, sure, but is there any nuance that you can probably add to it, or you would probably observe to it, as to why this is not a community and why something else is a community?
Right, and I think your example is a very good one because you can be in a group of people who have a shared interest, but think about that example that you brought, and if everyone has an individual goal in that group, but maybe it's a shared goal, like everybody wants to find other people to sell their used gears, but that I don't think makes it like enough to be, it makes it a community, right? So one aspect from the example is lacking to be a community is a shared purpose at the vision level. Like if the same group is framed in a way in which we're all passionate about reuse, and in addition to the transactional part, we also discuss, we also share, we also see each other as belonging and working toward a bigger cause than what we're doing, well, that I think has some more potential to be a community, right? It can start to feel like a community for people.
Sure.
Because if I see something and I wanted to share with people, if I have a question and I wanted to share with others, I can still refer to that group because the characteristic of the people who are in that group are somehow, their values are somehow aligned with my values, and I kind of like counted them as a group of people that I trust and I'm happy to be in the same group with.
Right.
And so that's one aspect, right? Most of the communities I've been working with and within have been, communities of practice, and the practice was always an educational practice, and I think we always had a very concrete project that we were working together toward. So it's not only we have this shared vision of like reuse or education should look like this, but then we have a concrete instantiation of something that needs to happen next Saturday. So each of us will contribute as much or as little as they want, and that was a choice in which we decided that our community, because it's based on volunteers' work, it needs to be something that people have the time and don't go out of their way doing it. They need to have fun, and otherwise it starts becoming a job that nobody wants to do it anymore. Anyway, but there was something concrete to work toward, and that I think it's a crucial ingredient for a long-lasting community, like to have a shared goal that renews every week or every month, like have something concrete to make together.
But can you think of examples? So it's much easier for me to imagine communities with this kind of concrete tasks, but can you imagine, can you think of, or do you have examples for communities without a concrete task? So for instance, let's say we are all concerned about the political state of the country, and we form a group where we discuss stuff, but there's only so much discussions would result in. I mean, there's no end result that is likely going to be changed because of this kind of like just talk. And I personally wouldn't call that a community, because I mean it's just a bunch of people sitting and talking and opinionating on like the state of affairs, which I think is a part of a community, but cannot be the definition for a community itself, or like cannot fully consume what the community does as a being. And so can you think of examples, or are you aware of examples where you've actually seen successful communities just discussing stuff without any concrete like action?
Yes, and again, I think actually the LCL community is more like that. We don't have a specific. Well, I'm talking about the participants in LCL, right? Because like LCL facilitators have a very clear task of like helping others learn, and we have all our rituals, and we all have our strategies, and we have our meetings, and we talk about very concrete things that needs to be done.
But the participants,
broader community of LCL, I see them as people who recognize themselves in some values that participate to the discussions, but also like sharing things. I think like the fact of like bringing yourself more fully into something is important. Then there is also another thing that came to mind, like even the community that you were describing of some people just getting together and talking about things.
Right.
That might feel like a community for some.
Sure.
And other people might be totally uninterested in that type of engagement, right? Like I may say, well, I don't like to be in a community in which everybody rants about like the things that are bad in the world, and that probably there, as we were discussing, there might be it might be intentional, and it's just like a place where people just can rant, and that's also important for people just to have a place where you can just like let the steam off. And some other times, unfortunately most of the times, there's not awareness that with the proper facilitation that can be a constructive place, and usually people like much more constructive place when they experience one, when they see the value, and then they say, oh, okay, so in this community I can also share questions and hear from others, and listening is one of the main thing that people can learn how to do. It's a really a skill and a muscle, and if it's like you're in a community in which there is good facilitation, people can learn how to listen and appreciate learning from others, and you can shape the community in a certain way. But again, I think even like this word that we're using, community, some people might say, yes, I'm in this community because I'm in this WhatsApp group. And some people say, well, no, community for me is more, and they're both valid. I think the question is more like knowing that there is a huge kind of spectrum and diversity and shapes and colors that the communities can take. So what is your idea? What do you want to do? What what do you want your community to look like? And that, I think, is a very intentional design question. And based on why do you want to do it, and how do you want to feel, like how do you want to feel in that community and other people to feel in that community, that leads to very specific design choices.
Interesting. So and even in this discussion as well, I think one thing that came up quite often is the sheer importance of the role of a facilitator. It seems to be coming up over and again in all the points we are touching. And so let's talk a little about the central role of facilitators, and how one can go about building a community of facilitators within your community, as in like how to build this group, and what are the nuances involved in it, what are the challenges involved in it, how do you identify facilitators, should you ensure that as a community sort of creator, as a cultivator, as the person who has set this community up, should that be your first task, first order of business, to identify these kinds of people, or like how do you go about it? So let's try to understand how we can identify facilitators, how many facilitators we would need ideally in a community. Is there like some golden ratio which probably works out the best? And probably you could also talk about like having been in communities or having been a part of communities without facilitators and seeing how they either didn't succeed at certain core values of taking that community forward, or like essentially just drawing the contrast of having facilitators in a community versus not having facilitators in a community, just to understand the dynamics which just the sheer presence of a facilitator helps and sort of provide structure to. So I've asked like a bunch of questions, but we can move across these different questions casually.
Yeah.
And we can start off with this notion of facilitators, and like, although it seems intuitive, is there some structure that you've identified over the course of years which has helped you sort of describe it in a much more systematic way, saying, okay, first, when you start a community, you don't think about all these things. Probably after some time, you start identifying, etc., etc.
Mm-hmm.
So, are there any thoughts around that?
Yeah, I think one thing to as a premise, like to kind of like think about is that even in this conversation, we're talking about facilitators again interchangeably for different ways, right?
Yeah.
We're talking about people in LCL, for example, who are helping participants.
Correct.
And also in the Coder Dojo community, there's like the mentors are the people who are helping the children. So there's that act of facilitation, right?
Yeah.
And then there is the internal kind of like set of norms and rules, that and conversations sometimes are facilitated by the leadership or the people who are more central in the community of practice that can help like shape what does the community of people who act as facilitators outside, but are like they are members of this facilitation community.
Sure.
So I just kind of like wanted to draw a distinction. And so for the sake of this conversation, I think it doesn't matter the fact that these people are facilitators of other people.
Yeah.
I think it's just like there are a bunch of volunteers who decide to come together, and I think that is already a filter, right? As you're starting to talk, how do you pick them, right? It's very different to do a job interview and hire someone versus just like having, accepting someone as a volunteer. And I like that you mentioned the time dimension, right? Because I think in the beginning, I believe it's crucial to find people who are really aligned with the values, right? Because the first seed of people will shape the culture of the group. And then at some point when you have this kind of like a culture established, even people who come in, they might find, okay, this is a good place for me to be, or, well, this is not the community for me, right? So just like it's kind of self-selection kind of a mechanism starts to kick in. But honestly, I'm saying all this, but in the Coder Dojo community, in Bologna, for example, I never said no to someone who wanted to help. That was a radical choice. Like that was like a risky choice, right? Because I'm just like the first time it was me, maybe 2 or 3 people that I knew that I pulled in, and another 10 who I had no idea what was motivating them, who were them, how long they would stick, were they really good people to work with children, would they embody our way. I think in that case there was a lot of like, no matter where you're coming from, I think most of my work was to set a vision, and then of course like some people left, some people just stuck around, and just like that kind of like helps stuff going.
It's interesting though. So one quick sort of deviation over there is you mentioned you started off this thing with 1 or 2 people whom you knew and pulled in, and the rest were organically sourced. I mean, the set of mentors who came in. And in the long run, did those 1 or 2 that you pulled in probably just because they were your friends and they knew you, and they probably said, okay, Carmelo is doing something interesting, let me go help out and let me go find out. Did they really stick? Or is it from the other subset of those who organically came in who ended up sticking in the long run?
Right, it's kind of like hard for me to remember exactly how it went, because it's been like now like 7-8 years ago that we started. But I can say that also, so I remember like some of the people who participated in the first meeting, when I was just saying, okay, this is what we would like to do, like, and we were in a pub, like in a bar. I organized the first kind of like meeting in a brewery, and there were a variety of people who came because of they read a blog post on the municipal kind of like I don't know, wall, right? And that was already a filter, right? And people who came and read what was the idea of a Coder Dojo came with certain expectations and things, and then the people I brought in myself, they were just coming mostly because of me, because they're my friends, right? And so there is something there, and I think it you need everyone, you need to like to throw stuff at the wall to see what sticks, and the more people you reach out, the more like people might kind of like stick with the idea and contribute to the idea. There is another aspect, even thinking about the progression over time and evolution. Like the person who took a leading role right now in the Coder Dojo Bologna community, she's a person very close to me personally. Like, she's my cousin. Like, and I brought her in the same way I brought in everybody. I was super excited about what we were doing. Say, hey, would you like to come sometimes? Just come and see what we do, right? And I used to do that with everyone who I met. I went to a conference, I went to a makerspace, people ask like, what do you do? And I started talking about, I teach kids how to code. It's super fun. You should come and see. And it's interesting that even my cousin Angela, she didn't come from in the beginning, but after 6 months, maybe after 1 year, she started to get curious and say, hey, are you doing this like every week? What is this thing? And other people just like, when you cannot expect people joining you from the day one, right? You will have a set of people who join you from the day one, other people who might join you when they start to see what it is really that you're making, right? So they need a little bit more of something concrete to see, and it keeps going and evolving over time.
Interesting. And so addressing the previous sort of facilitator question, so you said it is crucial that you identify probably as early as possible some core group of people whom you can distribute the workload with, and who are aligned ideologically with what you're going ahead with. So, but there's this other component of building a system, keeping it going, but making sure that people get a chance to glimpse at and to take a look at what has really happened, and deciding for themselves whether they want to sort of engage in it. And that's also equally powerful. I see. Interesting. And would you say, because one, I think point of distinction over here is also the fact that it's a different scale altogether between the two communities that you've just spoken about, the LCL and the Coder Dojo thing. So with Coder Dojo, it seemed to be much more organic, where the setting is very intimate, where you start off with like a flyer, people responding to the flyer, people coming in and talking, and the community getting built ground up. LCL seems to be a different use case, where there's already a machinery that exists, which is Scratch and the community that Scratch has, and you're trying to see if there's a subset of that community who might be interested in LCL. And I could be wrong in this description, but you can correct me. And my understanding is there's this quasi community that already exists out there, and you want to build another slice out of it, and then probably impart the LCL paradigm to this subset. And that doesn't seem as organic to me, at least in principle, because there's an existing machinery that you're getting into, but you're still trying to imbibe, and you're still trying to establish the same kinds of structures there and same kind of culture over there.
Yeah.
Any differences that you saw in or any fundamental ways in which your thought was different when it came to building your Koto Dojo organic ground up kind of effort versus picking up LCL from where it was and then trying to establish everything and seeing how things work?
Yeah, again, like, it's interesting because like the way in which the facilitator community started in LCL, I would consider it very organic, and it actually started with an experiment that I did in the Italian sub community first.
Interesting.
So again, it's very hard. You know, you need to start, and I think starting small has always helped me, right? And in maybe round 4 of LCL, I realized that I was thinking about the global community. I didn't have enough time to engage in conversations in Italian, in the forum or in the live kind of like video calls that we do every week during the course. And I was asking to some of my friends who are part of this, also the Coder Dojo ecosystem in Italy, but also others, you know, broader community of people interested in education that I know and I admire. I asked them, hey, would you like to help in the Italian community of LCL? And they did it, and we had like a separate meeting in Italian with them. We just like started, like, they were happy to help, and the Italian community started to kind of like flourish. You know, you attract more people if you engage with them. If someone writes a post in the forum, nobody responds, you lose interest. But if someone engages with you and just like, you know, like anyway, so it started off as an experiment in a sub community, and then the year after, I said, hey, why don't we just like try to extend this, like, and having language diversity and geographical diversity, just like let's try to pick some people who we would like personally to keep in touch and to grow with and to have around. And the main difference that I see between the way in which we invite, you know, like the in the Coder Dojo community, people show up, say, hey, can I be a mentor? Yes. Or sometimes we are more proactive, like if we see a parent or who's like active or nice, like, or we see someone else, you know, I go to a conference, I don't tell everybody, but I talk to you and say, Shashank, I think you'll be interested and would be a good fit. Come and see. So there is like a little of like proactive and passive, you know, like waiting for people to join. In LCL, the main difference is that we get to see how people behave in the community before we invite them. They're not unknown completely. We have this, the only rule, and actually there are exceptions to that rule, that you have engaged at least in one round of LCL. And so we can see the way in which you interact with others, we can see, and I don't know, we've been discussing, it's very hard to know what makes us invite someone. Because amazing people, there's a lot of amazing people in the community. But we connect to the ones who we feel like aligned from I don't know, I would call them like kindred spirits. More than anything else, more than skills, more than like what they're able to do. Like we see like, okay, these are people we can trust. And maybe they're very new to the ideas, doesn't matter, they will learn. They never facilitated the conversation, doesn't matter, they will learn. Like we see if people come from with the right attitude and we are able to recognize that attitude, we bring them in and we're sure they will learn. So it is like an act of trust.
Interesting. But you mentioned that you started off the Coder Dojo experience where you had kept it open, and there was no sort of criterion for who becomes a mentor. But was there at some point you made a switch from being open to all to being filtered?
No, I think we're still open to all.
Oh, okay.
It's very, I mean, if someone wants to help you,
sure.
You say yes.
Okay.
And sometimes that might require a lot of work.
Right.
Because, the person, for example, might not be able to receive feedback in a way that would make it easier.
Yep.
Or the person is, like in the Coder Dojo, kind of like the variety of people, sometimes you have people who are extremely technical, skilled, like from technical side, but they're really don't know how to interact with a kid, or they really are scared of that interaction, right? Or we have like people from the educational world who come with this, and who are teachers, and they come with this vision of like, okay, I'm gonna be there and make a lesson, and kids will do what I'm doing and will copy the thing, and it's not what we do in Coder Dojo. It's like an informal, free, open-ended environment that is like pretty much in contrast with what happens normally in school.
Sure.
So all these people, kind of like when they decided to join, they need to be open to change, to shift, to learn.
Absolutely.
And honestly, I've never seen, some people might take longer, but I've seen a trajectory of everyone kind of improving in their own way, and they might not end up to be this perfect, ideal facilitator, but everyone is improving, and I think the peer, more than the leadership, shape the culture and shapes and the reflections that we do together at the end of the dojo, and the way in which we decide how to phrase the invitation for the kids, and the choices that we make in terms of how many people do we, how many participants, how many kids are we able to support in the way we want to support them, and all sorts of micro decisions shape the culture, and so that's and maybe another thing that I would add is just from the leadership perspective, what have helped me in all these endeavors is being trusting people. Trusting you. There's someone new, you have no idea who they are, but you trust them, and they're surprised. There's this example, there's a teacher who took a workshop with us. At some point we were doing teacher dojos, same stuff of that we do with the kids, but for teachers.
Yeah.
She participated to one of this, and she said, I love this, I want to help children, I want to be a volunteer, count me in. And she came, but I don't know anything about Scratch. No worries, there's something you can do. And she really likes to do social media communication and stuff. And I said, okay, do you want to take over the Twitter account and take some pictures and tweet about it? And she was, okay, are you really? Yeah, this is the password. Join, do this. And she still remembers after years. She said, that fact that you didn't know me and you gave me the password of the Twitter account of Coder Dojo, that I could tweet anything representing a group that I don't even know yet, was a real transformative moment for her. And she was like, wow, I feel that in this group I'm trusted, and I want to repay that. With trust comes responsibility. Sure. And so she really wanted to feel that trust was well put,
Nice.
And I have dozens of similar examples in which people felt welcomed and belonged just from day 1.
But then the question is, why did you follow this template for LCL?
we actually do. And
why is there like an invitation? Why is there like a filtering process? So
well, the filtering is just a matter of like how many people among all of those who be good fits we are able to support. Like there are like some logistical aspects which is time zones. Like
Sure.
imagine like setting up a meeting
Sure.
across 7 or 8 different time zones and have everyone there.
Sure.
It's impossible.
Sure.
Even with 10 people it's very hard.
Sure.
20 is kind of like crazy. At some point we started to split meetings in 2, so doubling up the effort, right? So just to accommodate different time zones.
Right.
But also there is like, what is the size of a group where people start to feel that sense of intimacy and conviviality that and how fast that can grow, right? Like we started like with maybe it was like 10 people, and then this year it's like
wait, LCL started with 10 people,
like as facilitators.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I think the first group of facilitators was like between 10 and 15 with different, and then like this year we just like almost doubled up. And we feel we did it. I think I'm very proud of what happened this year. I think like people were like really connecting, and we're learning also how to engage people and to connect and help facilitating relationships between them. We organized online parties.
Sure.
And where everybody was like singing and everything was actually toward the end of the round, like as a closing moment.
Right.
That was a way for us to see how much people felt comfortable in being with others, facilitators. So, but that's something to keep in mind. It's a big question for us. Like, what do we do next year? Do we keep expanding the group? Do we consolidate it? Like, how many more people we can support? I had a personal relationship with all of them, and many of them started to have personal relationships with each other. You cannot say, okay, this is an open call for facilitators in LCL, come and join. It's not feasible. 100 people show up, that's a different thing. There might be interesting things you can do with 100 people, but not the type of work we want to do. No.
But this is like, so if I understand the numbers right, this is like 40 people trying to facilitate, did you say 3,000 people?
Let's say like there's like between like 5 and 10,000 people subscribe to the email. But as you know, like in online courses,
there's a drop
there's
off.
like not only a drop off, but even like the people who subscribe to the mail,
but are not
not
really
necessarily active.
Yeah.
I would say that again, it's very hard to draw a line, but we've seen about 300, 400 people just like sharing in the forum activities.
Okay.
So that's big, kind of like or introducing themselves in the forum. I would say like 3,000-4,000 people, 400 people.
Okay.
And also the people who participate to live events, whether they are like discussion based on coding workshops. Also, I think overall, like we had like about like 1,000 unique people who showed up, but like the ones who show up regularly were much less. Maybe there's like, I would say, 50 to 80 people who really kind of like showed up like more regularly.
Interesting. And this also sort of, there are like 2-3 questions that I had in mind when you were talking about this. So one thing to also understand and appreciate is the fact that LCL is a fully online community. Whereas your Coder Dojo was like a fully offline, as like fully physical community. Any challenges that, I'm sure there should be more challenges, or here's a way to phrase it. I mean, any stark differences in your strategy between dealing with these two kinds of communities, offline versus online, in terms of like creating facilitators, or like setting up this whole base of facilitators, and then setting up like communication channels, etc. So because I imagine, I mean, meeting physically half your concerns that you really need to think about immediately get dissolved because you're there physically. You can sense the mood right away. If everyone's feeling down, screw the activity, let's do something light and let's have fun, just keep the spirits high. Versus in an offline world where once things become in an online world where once things become online, what I've found is physical reality supersede any commitments that I have to an online kind of an interaction. So if, let's say, I have a meeting at like 5 p.m. on Zoom, and at 4:30 I realize, oh, there's some other pending work. The fact that I'm not physically present in that meeting at 5 p.m. simply means that my mind is ready to down prioritize that meeting and stay focused on the task that I was supposed to do at 4:30. So it's a very cognitive thing, saying, okay, not physically being present at a place can allow you to stay distant from whatever that activity is. So and this is just a general remark on like online interactions versus physical interactions. And I'm wondering whether you've noticed any adverse consequences of doing things online versus what you would have done traditionally in a completely offline setting.
Honestly, I think that, like, for me, in my experience, I couldn't say offline is always better than online. I think there are like challenges of these two modes of being together,
right,
as well as opportunities.
Right.
And if I had to make a kind of like comparison, I would say I wouldn't necessarily say that online is harder.
Sure.
Or or any or otherwise. I think the general strategy or the general kind of like spirit is being the same, and I came to recognize that this wasn't intentional. I just saw that trying to make it personal, make it, like you were asking, like, is it the personal connection priority versus getting stuff done in a certain way according to certain standards? Again, I wouldn't put these two things in contrast with each other.
Sure.
I think like that coming like as a whole person in this community kind of helps you lower some certain barriers and like being more open to learning, and so I think that helps people setting like being more productive and like raising the standards. But again, I think we had to come up with, like, the thing is, we have a millenary tradition of being together offline, and the online space is new.
Sure. So
offline, what we used to do is just like we call it like the pizza dojo,
right,
like, or the beer dojo.
Right.
After an event, we would go somewhere and just like drink and have this informal environment where we could just like share much better than in a formal retrospective or debrief, right? Just like that is when the actual interesting conversations happen, right? And so to me, the question when we were bringing this online was, okay, how can we create that environment? And it has a lot to do with just like the people who are in, the things that you share, the way in which you show up. I give you an example. Like, people, when they go into a meeting, they in the beginning of this community, they were just like, sometimes they were not using the camera because they, I don't look good or well, my hair are out of place and stuff like that, right? And at the end of the 6 weeks, 7 whatever period together, people are there just like bringing their kids in, playing the ukulele, or showing like crazy kind of like contraptions that they've built, right? So that informality, that conviviality, we were able to make it online as well. So what I would say is that the strategy is the same. Make people feel comfortable. Make people feel they belong, make people feel there's no judgment if you. And I do that even first like setting an example. I don't use a fancy microphone.
Sure.
I don't like I just join from my room, and as everyone else do.
Right.
And sometimes I just say, hey, I just woke up from a nap.
Right.
And and that creates a certain environment and climate that the type of people that we want to attract, they are drawn to. If I was like wearing a tie and like I wanted to have this kind of professional feel to the community, I would shape in a very different way. I would
Sure.
do different choices. I would model it in a different way.
Sure.
But what we want for this type of communities is really to let people be themselves.
Sure.
That's the main thing we say to the facilitators when they're asking, what should I do or whatever. Just like, you be you. You'll be fine. And whenever you have a challenging or interesting interaction with someone, something that you don't know how to do, bring it to the group. It's going to be an opportunity for everybody else to learn, right? And anyway, so that's just an example. Of course, you cannot eat pizza with people online, but we can make much more easily a talent show where everybody's singing, and that would be awkward to do in a real life setting. And similarly, there are like aspects of the online. Maybe I'll just say another one. The fact of being all over the world, it's an attractor for many people.
I agree.
I'm
Sure.
right now in this call with someone in India and someone in Mexico and someone in South Africa, and we're all here together. That's huge.
Okay.
And that's something that you can only have on a regular basis if you're doing online. So leveraging what is good about it. And when we talk about the weather, and we see that someone is just like wearing shorts, like it's summer in Brazil, and here it's snowing, and people are excited about this stuff. Like,
Sure.
we are part of something big,
Sure.
truly global.
Sure.
And that's one example of things that works better online.
But have you had a chance to engage in a super hyper local online community
Super hyper local. Well,
within the confines of a city or like some?
yes. I mean, most of the communication, even in Coder Dojo Bologna, happened online, right?
Right.
We met as much as we could, but most of the work, of preparation, for example, was done, and we experimented with different tools. And as the community grows, you transition from one thing to another. We started with this like mailing list, and then like it was too heavy to write a mail for every small thing, so we had like a hangout chat. And at some point, one single stream of chat was too chaotic, and we needed channels, so we transitioned to Slack. And now that we had this like Slack of Coder Dojo Bologna, and now that the pandemic hit, we started to organize virtual Coder Dojos in collaboration with other cities, which is another. And so we decided, okay, we need a different space to have like to get together, and they started a Discord server.
Sure.
They decided like whatever, there was a poll.
Sure.
They decided to have that,
Sure.
and now people are using that one. So it's like people from 5 or 6 different cities are now using that.
And thinking about all of this, I think this also reflects on my training more than anything else. The question that I'm going to pose is the fact that when I do start an initiative of this kind or any kind, what I'm also keenly, acutely sort of looking out for are general sort of statistics on the health of whatever my objective is. So if my objective is to, let's say, train kids, then one number that I'm always sort of looking at is how many kids am I able to train, and what is the general quality. Of course, measuring quality is slightly more abstract. So I will ensure that to the best of my ability and my sort of passion in that field will maintain that bar for quality and bar for how well the kids are learning. But there's some key metrics that I'm always in the back of my mind saying, am I hitting the kinds of goals? Because sure, I can be intensely happy and sort of satisfied with the fact that I'm training 10 kids in my local neighborhood, which is great, which has its own impact. But then, given who we are, we generally have this tendency to sort of see things at scale, try to push this beyond just your local community so that everyone can enjoy the kind of benefits that you probably experience at some point in your life. So you would want to see everyone to be able to take care of, enjoy these fruits. So has that ever been in conflict with, let's say, the process of setting up the community itself? Saying, I don't know, the facilitators are just not right, I'm not able to build that kind of base. So, but then as a consequence, I'm not able to reach out to more people, and that is very frustrating. So now should I put that as my primary goal and say, okay, let me reach out to that big number that I want to, even if it kind of dilutes the strong community sense of belonging that I have in the kind of group of facilitators that I built? Or should that never be a part of the equation? That's just non-negotiable. My having like a core group of facilitators is central to me, and the sense of belonging is central to me. And I don't care if I'm serving 10 people or 100 people. I think this is far more important than hitting those kinds of empirical success. So do you have any thoughts on this?
I mean, everyone approaches these questions differently, right? And also differently at different stages of life, I guess. Like, if you ask me 10 years ago, when it was all about startups and growth and scale and stuff, I would say, yes, we just like have, it's our responsibility to do things that are big and that reach a lot of people and everything. But I think even like working in many different projects and with many different communities, then I think to me right now in this moment, I'm less worried about the scale of a single project because I see that project makes sense with this size in this city. This is what I can do there, and this is what these people want to do. And then I have the opportunity now to work at a global scale. Again, like I think I came to the understanding that this push toward like scale and being big at all costs, which is also very typical of a certain type of like political thinking, it can not only dilute the values and like make you lose the real purpose why you're doing something, but also if you do it too early in the process, it just kills your project before it even starts.
Absolutely.
And so to me now the approach that I follow is I start with whatever I have, with the resources and with the people that are around me. We build alignment in like, okay, these are the things we want to do and this is what we can do and everything, but not try to push it beyond its limits, because there are so many other ways in which I can implement my vision. And it's like with other projects, with other groups of people, with other ways that in education, the problems that we're trying to tackle are huge. It's not that we're gonna solve the problem of like how people learn in this generation or even in the next like 3,000 years. It's just gonna be always some kind of like process, right? And so I think resisting that push of that we as MIT students and like top kind of like universities kind of like, they try to push you to say, hey, don't just be in your courtyard, just like the things that you do should have an impact in the world. And I think it's a good way to think about things, just like pushing you out of your comfort zone, trying to make something big. At the same time, the same message can really be detrimental in the moment in which you say, well, am I really wasting my time like working with these 10 kids? Should I be doing something bigger, something shinier, something like more impactful, like reaching billions of people? And that is where I think a lot of people just like get stuck.
Sure.
And you need to start with something. And and I think there's value in small projects as well, especially if it's something that you enjoy doing and other people are enjoying doing. If you push it sometimes like over the limit of what that specific set of people and resources can do, you just waste something beautiful, which is small, but it's sometimes making a huge impact in people's life. Even if it's not billions, it's like in the tens.
Yeah.
It's still good for me.
Absolutely. And this is, I think, one the great aspect. The other aspect that is usually not included in these kinds of conversations is also something that I want to get your opinions on. So, when you were running your Kodo dojo, let's say, and you would go out for like a beer after to discuss this, who would pick up the tab? So the larger question is trying to understand the financial sort of, I wouldn't call it like burden, but then there is a financial unavoidable sort of financial aspect to engaging these kinds of communities, and someone has to pick up the tab. And usually when you start small, it ends up falling on you, the cultivator, more often than not. So, and there's this other aspect that you're consuming someone's time, and they are there voluntarily, sure, but does finance ever come into the calculus in trying to engage these communities? So that's something that I'd love to. I know you have opinions on this, and I've engaged in these kinds of conversations in previous sort of avatars, but it'll be interesting to hear your take on. It need not be. I'm not. So here's one way to put it. So of course there are two aspects to the question that I asked. One is there is a financial operational cost in running these exercises, and no matter how you want to position it, no matter what kind of favors you ask for, you can drive down the cost, but it'll most likely be greater than zero. So there is some component to it. So how do you accommodate that, or how is that really accounted for? One. Two, you are expecting people to spend time, and of course they're doing it for the love of it. Will it ever cross your mind to put a dollar value to it? In either like not an overt salary stipend kind of way, but in any way possible. Will it ever come into the picture? Is it a part of the calculus at all? Should money ever be discussed in any of these conversations?
It's a long conversation that would probably deserve a different episode of this podcast. Honestly, I think the short answer. Well, I can talk like from my experience.
Yes.
So you started like asking, okay, what happens when you do a pizza, right? Who's paying for the pizza, right? Everybody's paying for the pizza. Yeah. And more interestingly, the how do you call it? The reminder, like if it's like if it costs like 16, people will put 20 and say, let's use the extra as a to finance our how do you activities. Yeah, because sometimes we have to buy small things and stationery, and
there's a running cost.
And the funny thing is that people have been happy to not only to do the work for free, but to pay to support some of things. So of course, and so in my experience, we really made a very deliberate choice in not paying the volunteers for the work that they were doing, because we do it for fun. If it doesn't work for you, no judgment. It's fine if you can't, do it.
Sure.
And honestly, I see the drawbacks of this type of decisions. Like, have many other friends who I would love to bring in, and they say, hey, I can't afford to do this on Saturday. I'd rather just do some paid work,
Exactly.
and it's fine.
Yeah, it's not unreasonable to pay someone for their time.
It's definitely not unreasonable.
Yeah.
And honestly, like if they should get the dollar
Yeah.
value that they would deserve,
Yeah,
it would be huge.
absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
So that's actually something also to think about it.
Mm.
Like it's just like whatever I would give them, it would not be enough.
Sure.
Maybe it would just like help them
Yeah.
with, some of them, like
Yeah.
with something. And also it really has implications of who can afford to participate to this community or not.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I think the choice of not kind of like starting to have this as a paid thing has helped like keeping the relationship genuine, to decrease any conflicts that they could naturally happen in this type of environments. Also, honestly, there's like an ethos, like we get requests of people who say, I love your Coder Dojo free stuff, like is anyone of your mentors who's interested in doing a private lesson to my kid or to organize this like training for this and that? And
Very
that's always like being okay. I mean, it's not because I am the leader I'm gonna do it. We just like we open up the call, or sometimes we say, okay, we just like it's a delegate topic, but we open it to everybody. And no matter if you come only once or you've been there all the time, some of this process, if the community is healthy, is self-regulated.
Sure.
Right? Some people say, oh, maybe I would do it, but if there is someone else, please do it. Or I think I'm not prepared for this. Some people need the encouragement to do it. Some other people might, just like... so somehow money come into the equation. Sometimes, like, how do you manage them? It's like, it's important. Like, questions like, how do you ethically deal with this type of things? In my experience, the less money are in the equation, the better, the healthier it is. Of course, we know that we are losing people. We know that not everybody can afford, and that's the price that we are paying for that, right? And similarly with LCL, we've been discussing at length, like these people are really helping, really making it, and we want to recognize their work. And I feel pressures also in my own group, my own team, like core team. I'm usually the one who's like a little more radical because of my experience with Coder Dojo, because I've seen what happened in other dojos in which like money started to go in.
Oh, is it? Oh, there have been dojos where money came into the equation.
Coder Dojo has this ethos. You sign, the one thing that you sign when you start a chapter is that volunteers are volunteers. You don't pay them, right? And the most important actually, it's not that. It's mostly kids don't pay to get to the Coder Dojo. That's the actual thing, right? So you can find like ways to finance. But again, like sometimes it has been working well. Sometimes it's just like mess things up, right? And we also started a non-profit around the activities of Coder Dojo, because sometimes we needed an entity to receive in-kind donation. We love in-kind donations. If someone wants to donate old computers, that we can invite people with no computers to show up. So anyway, that's a very, very personal kind of like perspective. I know it's limited, but I've been happy with how it's been working so far.
Because I wonder if there is a cultural component as well, because in all the interactions I had, so in the kinds of, let's say even for the data science kids thing, the after party or whatever, after reflection sessions, I would usually take them out for lunch. They would be willing to pay up, but then there was always a thing that, sure, I'd be happy if someone picks the tab for me. So, and it's also because it's the way in which that community was created, because it was like a very first time thing. I reached out to these random set of people. They all come in, and they're just responding to a call. They're all doing it, and they'd be happy to pay for it. It's very unlikely that they expect me to pay for it, but it's a conscious design choice at that point, saying, should I set an example by saying, okay, let's all split this tab, or should I just say, you know what, guys, I mean, great job. I mean, I'll be happy to pick this one up for all of you.
You know, there is something there that is about like power dynamics. like I don't know, it's very cultural, right? But especially I can talk about Italy.
Yeah.
It's very rare that people split the bill, right? There's always someone.
Same here, same in India.
In India,
So
right?
that's the
but in
context
the
that I'm
US,
putting
there is this culture in which is like
nobody picks it up. I mean, everybody splits. It's an egalitarian system. Yeah. So
Right.
that's the context that I was
So
putting in.
if I decide to pay,
Yeah.
I'm showing power, and I'm also telling, like, thank you for helping me doing my thing.
Exactly.
It's very different
Yeah.
to say we're all doing this, we're all peers, we all pay for our food as we would do if we were with friends. You know,
Yeah.
if like again, there are dynamics there. Like if I'm with like a friend or two, I would rather offer a round of drinks, and then someone else will pay for the next round, right? But that's still, we are balancing the power there. But if there's someone just like paying all the time, makes other people uncomfortable or signals something that is like not the way in which I want to shape this community. I want to shape this community as a egalitarian in a way, and there's like not trying to be the one who's like paying, right? Setting expectations. At the same time, there's another aspect of it. There's the culture of gifts, right? I'm not paying this up front. Just like, I want to thank you, people, right? And then so finding ways to show gratitude is important. I try not to use money to show gratitude, and there are many other ways you can do it. And most of the times, it's just like helping others when they need me, right? And being available for people for any other, you know, things that they might need help for. But I think that's another, like, I'm very conscious of the positionality and power dynamics that come with attached to money, and that's why I try to avoid as much as I can.
Interesting. Yeah. So also one other question, which even from all the communities that I had experienced back in India, and especially in rural communities, so this is not in the context of the kinds of things that we have discussed so far, but this is slightly removed in the sense that we were trying to build a community in like rural India, where we were trying to put together like a bunch of people for like a common cause. And many people have written about it formally as well. So, I mean, Amartya Sen, one of the economists, has written in his book saying, at least in India and in the Indian context, if you need to put a community together, you need to have women in it. It's like absolutely essential. And they are pretty much the binding agent which can really sort of push forward any community, at least in the rural context in India. And have you noticed that kind of like a, let's say, gender predominance, saying, okay, women seem to be far more involved in like when it comes to community building, because at least in my personal experience, men are horrible when it comes to like building community. The sheer apathy is like revolting, and you assume like, what the hell is wrong with you guys? I mean, this is your place, this is your community. I mean, you need to act and get your act together. And there's a sense of distance that they would always sort of portray, which is very different from the kind of conversation we've had so far. And this is just an additional sort of
I think again, like, there is in all the communities that I've been part of, like, I think more or less consciously, there's always been not only a balance, gender balance, which in tech, as you know, is pretty hard, but like especially in mentors, right? Actually, honestly, there was a much more of a intentional effort to bring like women in it, in for example in Coder Dojo. I think in LCL it's the opposite. There were more women than men, like in the facilitation group. But in general, I think it is, you know, like everyone brings a different attitude, and it is true that sometimes, like, I've seen like ability to connect emotionally much stronger in women, right? Like, and also the ability and interest in communicating outside. That also is something that I've seen happening more often. Again, but it's just like my own experience.
Sure.
I think the way in which you shape the community also kind of like can help to take down some of these barriers, or even like stereotypical ways of thinking of you know someone needs to do X.
Sure.
Okay, so a man will show up, or
Sure.
someone needs to do this like other things, so a woman will show up. I think it's for us working with children in Coded Dojo also kind of like really helps kind of thinking more broadly about gender roles and things. So I don't know, like I think like to me a community in which there is a good balance is healthier.
Sure.
It's normal that people might have more like attitudes and interests like more in a direction than in the other, and we try to welcome everybody, just doing something a bit more comfortable. And probably that's the thing, like bringing people to learn more about the other side. Like for us, the dichotomy is between like technical and educational, right? Like we want tech people to start developing that emotional intelligence that will allow them to also be good educators, and we want the educators to kind of go out of their comfort zone and trying, to experiment with technology and to feel that that's something that they can do, and that requires kind of like merging and just like overcoming these like real or perceived obstacles.
Interesting. Yep. So are there any points that we haven't covered? So I know we didn't.
I think we covered a lot of terrain. I don't know how many hours we've been talking. We should even check.
Oh, wow, an hour and a half.
Pretty long for a podcast. If you're still listening, thank you for your patience.
Bravo, kudos to you. So I think what we didn't, or probably some things that we discussed probably yesterday, or like in other conversations, was ingredients of like poorly managed communities where facilitation is generally mistaken, moderation is mistaken for facilitation.
That's a very good one, like the difference between moderating and facilitating.
Yeah, we can talk a little bit about that, and then we can probably see if we want to continue this in like another chunk, or we want to keep going.
Right. So maybe this is one thing I think it's worth discussing, because yesterday we were chatting about it, and like moderation is something that is needed in some communities, and probably in many communities, in all communities, like which is more like, I don't know, I don't want to make a strong comparison, but sometimes it might look like policing, or just like making sure that people respect the norms that are in a community, and if someone doesn't, you give feedback to people, you make them know that this is inappropriate, right? But if you come from a place of trust or and connecting people at the personal level, we never had in the community that I've been in, I think moderation was never a big need. Sometimes, of course, you need to address some issues and talk to the people and making sure you give the appropriate feedback. Most of the time, when things work well, you rather facilitate and just like encourage people to bring something instead of like discouraging people to act in certain ways. So I think that's one way to look at facilitation versus moderation. I know it's like much richer and more complex.
Sure. No, because it's funny that because there's like in the quasi community that I'm trying to build over in my dorm, I think facilitation has now given way to moderation in some sense. And the concrete example I can give you is, so you know this context, but to anyone else who might be listening, this is the context.
If you're still there.
If you're still there. So the broader agenda of the little community that we're trying to do is we want to organize these lunches or dinners every week for like folks who stay on my dorm floor. And it's been a weird experience in trying to get them all together towards this one simple common goal where everybody wants something out of it, in the sense that everybody wants to enjoy this dinner, but no one really wants to share the responsibility of doing whatever little tasks it takes, be it like choosing a restaurant, placing a phone call, placing an order, picking up the dinner from the lobby and bringing it up to the floor. So no one wants to be involved in any of these subtasks. And it's more of a... And this has purely been an online community where I haven't really met them physically. Not
But
all
you
of
live
them.
in the same...
But we live in the same building. But I haven't had a chance to meet all of them physically. I've just managed to meet some of them.
Mhm.
And we had probably met over a Zoom call, and only a subset had turned up, not all of them had turned up. So not everyone wants to even engage. At least that's the sense that I get out of it. But what's interesting is recently there was this little incident that happened where I ordered these bunch of dinners, and as a routine thing, I was just checking up with people on how their dinners was and like whether they enjoyed it. And one of them said, "Oh, I went back empty-handed." And I'm like, "What? How did you manage to go back empty-handed? I'm sure I checked all the orders. The orders were there. Why do you have to leave without any food?" And he was like, "Yeah, someone seemed to have picked my food." And that just, I mean, really drove me mad. I mean, it's such a simple activity. And then this is for like a shared good, and it's like a shared activity. And someone who's acting in good faith goes back without food. It just drives me mad. I mean, there's no reason why this should be happening. And in hindsight, I think what I did was probably like a very wrong thing to do, where I just wrote like a snarky email to everybody saying, "Guys, this is just not right. I mean, here's the thing. Next time, if you don't find your order, it's a simple thumb rule. I mean, remember what you ordered. Go see what your order is. If you don't find it, talk to me. I mean, you have a conversation with me instead of just going ahead and picking someone else's order." And that was the tone, and it wasn't like a very sort of pleasing tone. It was a very sort of authoritarian tone saying, "Please don't do this. I mean, this is just not acceptable, and like, be adults, and this is what you need to do."
Right, which is interesting to me. That brings to probably another episode on conflict management.
Sure.
But I think you gave the benefits of the doubt to the person who's just like who didn't get their order.
Yeah.
But you didn't do the same for the person you thought stole the food, right? Like your image is like someone's like taking advantage of the fact that it's there, right? Or
It's not actually. That's not my opinion of
because
it.
maybe someone, I'm just like,
I know exactly what had gone wrong.
Oh.
No, I know the root cause, but it's very weird that someone would play out the set of circumstances in this way. The root cause was my flatmate picked up 2 boxes instead of 1. And he did it by complete mistake because I had saved 1 box for him. He didn't know that. So he went and picked out another box. So that just reduced 1 box in the equation.
Wow.
And that started off this chain reaction of people just picking in random stuff. I know the root cause. I know exactly why this has happened.
And you still brought that message in the mail? Why?
Because if this weren't that case, if there was genuinely 1 order less, the end result would still be the same, right? And people would just randomly go ahead and start picking up things, which is very absurd.
But didn't happen. Like it
has happened in the past. No. It
Okay.
has happened in the past. This is not the first complaint that I'm reacting to.
The image that comes to mind is like when you scold a kid for no reason. This kid has done nothing wrong. And you scold them.
No, it is wrong in the sense that someone who hadn't ordered like a vegetarian meal picked up a vegetarian meal because they didn't find their meal. I mean, why would I do that? And the vegetarian guy, poor guy, goes back alone without like a dinner at the end of the day because he can't eat the remaining chicken meal, which he doesn't know existed in the first place.
Right. Yeah, but I'm just saying that, sometimes like you kind of like, even the way in which you respond then kind of like causes like brings the community closer or farther from where you want it to
I
go,
agree. I completely agree. And
yeah.
that was like a bad move.
Mm-hmm.
And in hindsight, I mean, that's like a shit move, and that's.
But it's great that you recognize it, right? And then we mess up all the time. The question is like, did you write another email to update of what happened? You know, and say, hey, wow, I just realized that this happened. I know everyone was well intentioned. I'm sorry for the tone of that email. I know we are a good community, and I'm pretty sure that if we pay attention next time, none of this will happen again. Like or finding reparation to something that happened, because also that show of vulnerability, of recognizing mistakes, it's crucial to shape the community in a certain way. Just if you want to have a community that's like respectful and constructive and trustful, those little acts that, you know, like takes a little effort to do, but then just like pay back in an amazing way. Because they really set the tone. Okay, like you made this mistake of picking a bag instead of another. I make this mistake of overreacting. Everybody makes mistake, but we will grow and we will get better at this.
Yeah, no, I don't think I followed up with that email. Probably I should. Yeah, that's the right thing to do. Yeah.
I mean, everyone will make more mistakes and will be more opportunities to just exercise this.
Yeah, it's no. What's even more surprising is the fact. I mean, what's unfortunate is the fact that it's a brittle community to begin with, in the sense that there's any or limited interaction, and it only happens in this small, narrow window of things. And I go and screw it up further with this harsh toned email saying, "What the hell, guys? I mean, this is like one small thing. I mean, why are you goofing this up?"
Right. Yeah.
So yeah.
We're all human. People will understand.
Yeah, hopefully. Yeah. So it's interesting. Yeah, moderation, conflict management. I think the nuts and bolts of any community would boil down to these things, I think. And that's why facilitation is also probably an integral part of it.
Definitely.
And no matter how much, like this is something that we were discussing yesterday as well, no matter how much structure we seem to have in our minds of how we want the community to shape itself, I'm sure the reality of it will be like a complete shock to our preconceived notions of what we want the community to look like.
Yeah.
And I think dealing with those realities is like a big part of being a part of the community.
Yes. And leading is it's a crucial part of that. You know, like we haven't talked much about leadership, but like the leadership style that I've seen working for myself and the community I'm in is always like a servant leader. It's someone who's just like helping others, supporting others, encouraging others, rather than, and also setting the vision, but the vision emerges from the behavior and from what happens, right? Rather than, okay, we subscribe to this paper and we all sign and everything. And one of the main crucial responsibilities that I found myself being in, especially as a person who was like well connected and respected and having given trust and received trust for everybody, was managing conflicts about people in the community. That happens all the time. Any community has conflicts. The way in which you act as a leader, or if people ask you, and this most of the times it happens, like there is a quarrel, there is like a misalignment, people come to you and say, hey, this is what is happening, like I don't know what to do, this person misinterpreted, or this person did that was hurtful and stuff like that, and I don't know what, you know, and she's not listening to me, and it's like whatever. It's like you acting as a mediator, it's just like more of like anyway, just to say, most of the time I find myself just like using the fire hose, just putting water and trying to avoid to starting fires. It's the first thing.
Yep. It's a very, I think it's much more delicate a balance than what it seems, and people who have probably experienced it firsthand know the importance of, probably appreciate the importance between like a good mediator versus like a mediator who's probably not as involved and who probably has like a different style.
Right, and you can also solve quarrels like if you have authority and respect from people, you can just be authoritarian and say, oh, this person is right, this person is wrong, like whatever, if they deal with that. But like the style of leadership that I think brings to healthier and long-lasting communities in which everybody is growing is that type of leadership in which you are listening to everyone. You are trying to make people talk to each other, understand each other, rather than using your power to choose or to
One other related question is also the fact that you mentioned the process of, let's say, selecting mediators right now, facilitators in LCL, is there needing to be some sort of like a personality fit or a cultural fit in the sense of like they need to have certain kinds of traits in them, which is identified more through their actions than any other qualification, skill qualification. Do you think you stand the risk of self-selecting people who are just like you and making it more homogeneous than what you would probably want in the long run? Is that like a valid risk to be worried about, saying I probably like this person because they think like me, they act like me, so let's get them on board? And what you really have is like a replication of like 40 kind of Carmelo-ish folks in the group, so you're essentially building like one big Carmelo party over there. So is that like a valid concern to be thinking about and be conscious about?
It's very hard to be a Carmelo. Like, I don't find many of them around. In the same way, you don't find many Shashank around, and you don't find many Arunas around or Ekbals around. So I think everybody brings something unique. I truly believe that, and I think that everybody is bringing value, even if the personality is different, right? I just think that even in communities that have been kind of like helping, like shaping, I think there is an underlying alignment in the values. Like you cannot think that kids should be scolded to learn better.
Sure.
Like that is a like red flag.
Sure.
But you probably won't survive one day in our community, because the first time you do that and you see everyone telling you, hey, I noticed that you were doing that, like we don't really do this in our community, that person will say, oh, whatever, you freaks, I'm leaving.
Sure.
Right? Versus having that fundamental alignment and just like having a very different character, very different personalities. Like in the communities that I'm in, you can see all sorts of people. Like, and also especially in the global one with LCL, cultures, like different cultures, which sometimes is just like is in the edge of, like, do we still consider that, just like aligned with LCL? And of course, yes, you need to be flexible and understanding that people come from different walks of lives and like grew up in different like cultural contexts, and it's more challenging for sure. But I never seen that as a big problem, because I've seen enough diversity to make all of us busy in the art of being together. It's definitely never easy.
Alrighty, so let's pause and call this a wrap. I think we've covered like a big swath of like topics today. And I understand the flavor of this conversation probably wasn't the same as what we had yesterday. We were
always a different flavor,
getting into the details and the nitty-gritties of like actual specifics of like, oh, if we were to look at this kind of like a scenario, how can we set up like a facilitator base over there versus something else? And it was I think like a different intellectual exercise that we went through yesterday.
Right.
Whereas today it seemed to be a lot more high level, and we kept moving from topics and just trying to get a broader sense of what this entire enterprise entails.
Maybe one thing that I would add before we wrap up, which is something that is a bug that's kept in my mind since you asked the question about scaling and growing I think I was thinking like how sometimes people think of growth in terms of like quantitative, also qualitative, but in terms of like higher standards.
Yeah.
I think in many of the communities and the way in which I've been growing in this community allowed me to see that the more I grow, the more I realize that there are like other categories of people that I want to work with.
I see.
Right? So who do we attract in our Coder Dojo clubs is people who are already, that their parents already
Exactly.
understand
That's an important
this,
point. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so if I have to move and grow
Yeah.
and like make this movement evolve,
Yeah.
what is in my mind constantly is that how can we make this more equitable?
Sure.
How can we make
Different
this
segments.
more accessible
Yeah.
to different people?
Yeah.
And that doesn't necessarily is the most obvious things that people would do, because if I want to increase numbers, I just go into an audience
Yeah.
that fits, and it's already there is already a
Yep.
demand, right?
Yep.
So really being driven by value, this is probably what I would like to say, and thinking of like in whose service is this community working, and what is and as a consequence, like in which direction do I want to see this growing? It's not necessarily making it bigger, not necessarily being more like higher quality, whatever your like assumption of what quality is look like. It is also like, who am I reaching out? Who am I working with?
Yep.
These are important questions to keep in mind.
Absolutely. I think I've had a very similar conversation related to the kind of students that we want to attract, the college kids that we want to attract, because it's as soon as you put a premium on the kind of skill, you're pretty much adding a filter and doing a self-selection in some sense, because the kind of people interested in data science, exposed to data science, let's say, at a college level, is an automatic filter. I mean, and it doesn't. You won't attract like someone from like a rural public school versus like a posh private school in a city. So I think absolutely. I think having a mix is important, and being acutely aware of the kinds of crowds that you're pulling in is extremely super important. I think. Yeah, I fully agree.
Cool. So we can leave like people with this question, like who do you want to work with? Who do you want to impact with the communities you want to build? It's one of the crucial questions to keep in mind.
Absolutely. Yeah. Alrighty. So thank you so much, Carmelo, for spending Christmas Eve with us on this podcast, spending 2 hours on this conversation. This is an absolute pleasure, and it was great that you were able to distill all your learning in an articulated in answering these questions on community building. And I hope this conversation has also helped you in some way in structuring your thoughts.
Definitely. It was a lovely conversation. It was really a great way for me to reflect, but also to learn more about, like, even learning about your questions is already very, very helpful. And I hope that people who might listen, or ourselves who might listen to this in a couple of years will find it helpful and insightful. And I look forward to see how our ideas will continue to evolve.
Absolutely. Alrighty, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, my good sir.
Thank you. Wow.